realized that they could make the kind of wine that they love right here in California. So they started acquiring land in Alexander Valley in 1972. We're now up to 1,200 acres. So most of that a contiguous kind of piece of property. We did recently purchase another vineyard called Harlech in Alexander Valley, but only about 10% of our acreage is under vine. So the Jordans really had this dream of having like a French estate where a lot of this was left untouched, it was left to Mother Nature, and that's still kind of how it is today. So we do have, like I said, about 120 acres of vineyards, and then about an acre and a half garden, but a lot of this is just free space. John really realized the gem that we have here and wanted to share it with everyone, so we started doing public tours and tastings as well. Another change he made was towards sustainability. So we'll talk about this a lot as we kind of go throughout the winery, but sustainability is a really big piece of what we do here. We have a few acres of land dedicated to pollinator gardens, so I'll talk a little bit about that later. We try to be really sustainable with our water use. That's a big problem with winemaking. They use a lot of water, so we'll talk about how we mitigate some of that as well. We also started the John Jordan Foundation, which gives a portion of our profits to different programs, specifically in youth health and education. So makes us feel good about what we do here. The two types of wines that we make. So we only make two wines here, Chardonnay and Cabernet. Those were two of the things that the Jordans really loved. They loved a Burgundian style Chardonnay. That was actually not the first wine we made. That came a couple years after our first vintage of Cabernet. First vintage of Cabernet was in 1976. And we've continued to only stick with those two, and we release one per year. There's no special reserve, nothing like that, because we really want every bottle of Jordan you taste to be consistent, reliable, delicious every time. So our Russian River Valley fruit, all of our Chardonnay comes from Russian River Valley. Originally they wanted to do Alexander Valley Chardonnay, and they did for a little bit, but they found that it's just a little bit too hot here for the type of Chardonnay that they wanted to go for. And they get destemmed. So this is our destemmer. During harvest, there's a big, basically dumpster that all of those stems go into, and those get composted on the property. But the Chardonnay goes into these guys, which are bladder presses. So think of this as like a big cylinder that can rotate on its own, but there's also like a balloon inside that can inflate and crush those grapes. We don't press them fully because we don't want a ton of skin contact. Skin contact produces tannin, it produces color. We want a really crystal clear Chardonnay, so we don't over press it. Our Cabernet, on the other hand, does not get pressed off the skins. It goes into our tanks on the skins directly.
Have you noticed the seasons getting warmer and warmer as far as climate in this area?
Trend-wise, yes, generally. And like anything, we have our hot years and our cold year. Like this past year was kind of a cooler harvest year. We had a really late, cold, wet spring, which led to a late harvest. And different challenges with that come than the hot years. So like botrytis, rot in the vineyards can happen when it's so late into the season. But generally hotter, and that's why like I said, we're moving a little more coastal.
When is one of the grapes normally picked, or is it just?
It varies. So it was becoming like August was always like our cellar people never, had Labor Day off. Like they were always like already working. And not only did they have Labor Day off this year, they had like a lot further than that. They were like doing jobs, because we have like some interns that we bring in for harvest. Nice. They were like painting this stuff. Like, stuff they had never done before because they had so much time. So our harvest didn't start until September. And went well into October, which is not usual in the last few years. August is pretty typical for Russian River Valley Chardonnay, and our Cabernet was usually September. pretty new to us. So Maggie got one of these in 2021 to kind of play with, see how it would elevate our style. Jordan is an older wine brand. You know, our first vintage was in 1976. And we try to be really consistent with our style, but that doesn't mean we're completely resistant to change. And that change comes when it will improve and, you know, kind of lift up our current style that we already have. So we're really careful. Maggie's always testing new barrel samples, new everything, new corks, new closures, everything. So this is something that really excited her because it would really bring in a little more of that Burgundian influence, because in Burgundy they have quite a bit of limestone in their soil, which is reflected in the wine. We don't have that here, but this offers a way to get a little bit of that into the wine. The barrels, and you can see here we've got kind of a sediment on the bottom. So that is our lees. That is the dead yeast. They've done their jobs. They've eaten all the sugar. They made alcohol, and then they died. But then we're not done with them yet. We do age our wines sur lie because it adds a nice body, nice texture to the wine. But in order to kind of reap the benefits of that texture, you need to stir it up. So for us, that's a process called batonnage. So you take one of those batons over there, those long kind of metal poles with the propeller on the end, and you put it in through the bung hole and you stir it up. Happens spontaneously in these vessels. You have to have it pretty warm in here for that to happen. So during that time of year, it's toasty in here and a little humid. But that process takes a couple of weeks, and then it'll go into those new French oak barrels for 12 to 14 months. That's where it's really getting all of its flavor. You know, those oak profiles, the tobacco, vanilla, those nice toasty notes. Then it's going to come back in here for a second time. And when it comes back in here for a second time, we're not working on flavor, we're working on mouthfeel. And reason being, these are completely neutral. So these are original to the winery. They were built around 1976 before the walls even went up around them.